The stagecoach rattled down the dusty road of Wyoming's wide plains, carrying with it not just sacks of letters and parcels, but also a woman whose heart beat with the nervous rhythm of hope and fear colliding. Her name was Elena, a young woman from across the ocean who had left behind her family and the familiar comfort of her homeland because a man's letters had promised her love, security, and the chance of a better life. In her village, life had been harsh. Food was scarce and opportunity scarcer still. When she read the advertisement for mail-order brides, she saw it as more than a gamble. It was survival, wrapped in the fragile paper of a handwritten note. The man she was promised to, a rancher named Thomas, had sent words that sounded kind enough. But Elena knew words could be deceiving. She clutched the edge of her shawl and whispered prayers under her breath, the soft melody of her accent wrapping even her prayers in the lilt of her mother tongue. The other passengers eyed her with curiosity. They had heard whispers, a foreign bride coming into town. Some of the women smirked, their lips curling with judgment, while the men whispered to one another about whether she was desperate or dangerous. Still, Eleanor kept her gaze on the horizon, on the promise that somewhere ahead her future waited. When the stagecoach finally rolled into the town square, her breath caught in her chest. The town wasn't grand, but it was bustling with ranchers, cowboys, shopkeepers, and children darting across the dusty streets. She stepped down carefully, her dark eyes scanning for the man whose letters she had memorized. Thomas was there, standing tall in his work clothes, his face hardened by years of ranching, his jaw tight. At first his eyes softened when he saw her, but as soon as she opened her mouth to greet him in her sweet yet foreign tone, his expression changed like a storm rolling in. "You didn't tell me you'd sound like that," he said sharply, his voice carrying so loud that even townsfolk nearby turned to listen. Elena froze, not understanding. She smiled nervously and tried again. "I am Eleanor, your wife, from letters." The accent draped her words like music. But instead of hearing music, Thomas heard strangeness. He frowned. "I can't have a wife who can't speak proper. Folks will laugh. They'll say I brought home someone who ain't even American." His words cut through her chest. Like a cold blade, whispers rose from the crowd. Some of the women chuckled behind their fans. One old man muttered, "Poor girl traveled all this way just to be turned out." Elena's hands trembled as she clutched her small bag tighter. She tried to explain in broken English that she could learn, that her heart was honest, that she would work harder than anyone. But Thomas turned his back, shaking his head. "Go back where you came from. You're no bride of mine." The words fell heavy, final, cruel. The crowd began to disperse, some shaking their heads at her misfortune, others still sneering. Elena stood there alone in the dust, tears burning her eyes. Her dream had shattered before it had even begun. She thought of her mother's blessing, the long voyage across the sea, the hope she carried, and now she had nothing. Rejected, humiliated, stranded in a land where no one knew her name. But just as she lowered her head in shame, another voice cut through the silence. "She don't need to sound like you to belong here." The voice was steady, deep and warm, carrying the slow drawl of a cowboy. Eleanor turned, and there he stood, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sun-browned skin and eyes that carried both strength and kindness. His name was Jack, a cowboy known for working the cattle drives and for having a heart that often strayed to the side of the helpless. He tipped his hat slightly toward Elena, his gaze firm on Thomas. "You fool," Jack said. "You're throwing away a woman braver than any man here. She crossed an ocean, a continent, and you can't stomach her voice. That voice is soft as spring water after a long drought. It don't harden the world, it makes it gentler." The crowd went quiet. Some looked at Jack in surprise, others with grudging respect. Elena blinked, tears spilling down her cheeks as she looked at this stranger who had defended her when no one else had. She whispered, Why you say this for me?" Her accent curled around every word, fragile yet beautiful. Jack stepped forward, his boots stirring the dust. He looked right into her eyes and said, "Because, miss, Sometimes the world don't need more noise. Sometimes it needs someone whose voice can soften the rough edges. And I reckon yours does just that, his words wrapped around her wounded heart like a balm. For the first time since stepping off the stagecoach, she felt seen, not as a foreigner, not as a mistake, but as a woman worthy of kindness. From that day, Eleanor's path shifted. Though Thomas walked away without looking back, Jack offered his hand, not in marriage, not in promise, but simply in friendship. "Come on," he said gently. "You'll not be standing here alone while folks gawk. You got a place at my ranch until you find your footing." And though Eleanor hesitated, unsure if she could trust yet another man in this strange land, something in Jack's steady gaze told her that his words were true. She took his hand, and together they walked through the judgmental stairs into a future neither of them had expected. Her journey was far from over. Indeed, it was only beginning. But in that moment she understood something. Sometimes rejection clears the path for a destiny greater than the one you thought you wanted. And sometimes, just sometimes, a cowboy's voice could carry the power to mend a broken spirit. The days that followed Elena's rejection were painted with both sorrow and unexpected kindness. For though Thomas's cruelty had cast her adrift in a strange land, it was Jack's steady hand that guided her toward a fragile new beginning. And as she stepped onto his ranch, for the first time she felt both gratitude and fear swirl inside her, because she had traveled halfway across the world for a husband who had turned his back. And now she was under the roof of a cowboy whose heart she could not yet read, though his actions spoke with a language that transcended accents. Jack showed her where the barn stood, where the chickens roamed free, where the little creek cut through the back pasture, and he told her plainly, "You don't owe me a thing, miss, just be yourself. And find your feet," words that sounded so foreign in their generosity that Elena wept alone in the small guest room he offered her, her tears soaking into the thin pillow as she whispered to her absent mother that maybe kindness could grow even in the wild soils of this new world. Each morning she woke to the sound of roosters and the lowing of cattle, and though she struggled to understand every word Jack said, his tone always carried patience, never mockery. And when she stumbled over English phrases, he would smile and gently correct her, saying, "No hurry, Elena, you'll get there." And those moments became tiny seeds of courage within her heart. But not all in town shared Jack's compassion, for whispers followed. Elena, whenever she ventured into the mercantile or the small church, women looked down their noses, muttering that she was foolish to think she could belong, while men smirked at her accent as if it were a trick to amuse them. And though Elena kept her head high, she felt every whisper like a thorn, every laugh like a stone. Yet whenever she returned to the ranch, Jack would simply look at her with those calm, steady eyes and say something as simple as, "Good job gathering the eggs," or "That stew smells mighty fine," and those little affirmations stitched back the pieces that the town had tried to tear. In time, she found herself learning the rhythms of ranch life, her small hands surprising even her with how strong they grew, milking cows at dawn, mending torn clothes by lantern light, learning the American names for every tool and creature. And though her tongue still faltered, Jack never made her feel lesser. Instead, he marveled one evening by the fire. "You know, Elena, when you talk, it feels like the world slows down a mite, like it don't have to be so harsh all the time." And though she blushed deeply, her heart soared because here was a man who saw beauty where others saw defect. One afternoon, as summer's heat baked the earth and the sky stretched wide and unbroken, disaster struck when a storm rolled sudden and fierce, tearing across the plains with winds that rattled the barn, doors and lightning that spooked the cattle into a frenzied stampede. Jack raced out on his horse, shouting commands to calm the herd. And without hesitation, Eleanor ran into the storm too, her skirts whipping around her legs as she grabbed a lantern and tried to guide stray calves back toward the corral, her voice, though accented and broken, rising above the thunder as she called softly to the frightened animals. And Jack later swore that her tone gentle like rain on dry earth, seemed to ease them more than his shouts, as if even the beasts understood her. Together they worked until the storm passed, and when they finally collapsed in the barn, soaked and exhausted, Jack looked at her with a mixture of awe and tenderness, whispering, "You saved more cattle than I did tonight." Eleanor and she, trembling, whispered back, "Because my voice," soft for them, and he nodded, brushing wet strands of hair from her face. "Soft for me too," a confession that made her breath catch in her throat. It was in those raw hours of labor and danger that something undeniable began to grow between them. Something neither had sought, yet both felt. Jack, the cowboy who had never thought himself worthy of love, and Elena, the rejected bride who had believed herself unwanted. The bond deepened slowly in stolen glances at supper, in laughter over her attempts to pronounce certain English words, in the way he began to show her the stars at night, pointing out constellations while she told him the names. Her homeland had given them, her accent turning those old stories into music he never tired of hearing. Still, Elena feared allowing her heart to hope, for she remembered too vividly the cruelty of rejection, and she wondered if Jack only pitied her. But Jack, for his part, wrestled with his own doubts, asking himself if he had the right to love a woman who had come here, seeking someone else. And so for weeks they danced around their feelings, both too cautious to step closer, though their souls already leaned toward each other. Then came the autumn festival in town, a night of lanterns, music and dancing, where Jack insisted Elena come despite her fears of more whispers. At first, indeed, the townsfolk smirked as she entered, their eyes full of the same judgments she had endured before. But Jack took her hand firmly and led her straight to the dance floor, saying loud enough for all to hear, "I'd rather dance with Elena than any woman here, because when she speaks, the world listens." And as the fiddles played and the crowd stared, Jack spun her around, her laughter bubbling up in nervous bursts until it melted into pure joy. And the more she laughed, the more others noticed her light. So much so that by the end of the night even those who had mocked her were asking her to tell them words from her homeland, realizing that what they had ridiculed was in truth a gift. Elena glowed that night, not because the town had accepted her, but because Jack had shown her that her worth was never theirs to grant. It was her own to carry. In the quiet days that followed, Jack finally found the courage to speak his heart. One evening by the fire, as Elena mended one of his shirts, he leaned forward and said softly, "You came here looking for a husband in a man who didn't see your worth. But Eleanor, I see it. I see it every day, in the way you work, in the way you speak, in the way you've turned my lonely ranch into a home. I can't promise riches or comfort, but I can promise you'll never be mocked for your voice again. To me, it makes the whole world softer. Eleanor, would you be my wife?" Her hand stilled, her heart hammering as tears welled in her eyes. And though her accent wrapped around every word she answered, her meaning was clear as dawn. "Yes, Jack, I be your wife." He pulled her into his arms, holding her as if she were the most precious thing the world had ever given him. And in that embrace, Elena knew her journey had led her not to the man she thought she wanted, but to the man her soul truly needed. Their wedding was small, simple, held beneath the open sky with only a few friends and the endless stretch of land as witness. But as Jack placed the ring on her finger and Elena repeated vows in her trembling, accented English, those who once doubted her wiped tears from their eyes, realizing they were watching something pure, love that had been tested by rejection, forged in kindness and sealed with courage. And when Jack kissed his bride, he whispered for only her to hear, "You're my soft voice in a hard world." Words that Eleanor carried with her forever, a promise that no matter how rough life became, love could always soften the edges. So the rejected bride became the cherished wife. The cowboy who defended her became the partner she never dreamed she'd find. And together they built not only a ranch, but a legacy of compassion, showing all who knew them that accents, backgrounds, and scars mattered little when two hearts learned to speak the same language: love. And dear friends, if this story touched your soul, if you believe in the power of kindness, courage, and unexpected love, then do not forget to subscribe to our channel right now. Your support helps us bring you more stories of resilience, hope, and the beauty of the human heart. Because just like Elena's voice made the world softer, your presence makes this journey brighter. Stay with us, for many more stories await.